Today's meeting is being hosted from the lands of the Yorta Yorta people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and importantly, we should note this land has never been ceded. A special guest today is Violet Coco, and she'll talk to us about Extinction Rebellion, but I need to get through a few housekeeping things first. So please put yourself on mute, as that will help cut out any weird background noise. Of course, unmute yourself when we get to Q&A, and we'll have a session after Violet has spoken. We should have today's meeting all wrapped up by midday. And today, as I said, we have with us Violet Coco, and Violet is a full-time activist with Extinction Rebellion. Violet had been studying philosophy, I understand, but came to the conclusion that the climate crisis was so serious that it warranted all her attention. And so she decided to become a full-time climate activist. She tried a few other organizations, but switched to Extinction Rebellion because they had, as she felt, a global view of what was going on. Violet has been involved in a lot of non-violent protests and was demonstrating about the federal government's latest budget when she was arrested and jailed, or went to court in Canberra, because she was concerned that the federal government was continuing to pump our money, public money, into the fossil fuel industry. Although she had a sympathetic judge, or she felt like she had a sympathetic judge in the court, Violet was sent to jail for several days, or 7 days. And so I asked Violet to tell us something about herself, and tell us something about Extinction Rebellion, and tell us something about why you adhered to your values and didn't accept a bail. Thanks, Violet.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I'd just like to acknowledge that I am in Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and also pay my respects to elders and also the youth. There's a Ngunnawal Youth Council here, and the Indigenous youth that really have a big job ahead of them of carrying the torch of culture after the genocide that happened on this country. And so I think it's really important that we support the youth wherever possible. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are in a time of climate and ecological emergency, and that our actions today and every day impact the habitability of our planet for ourselves and for generations to come, and that First Nations people have been on the front line of that emergency since colonization. And I'd like to acknowledge all of you for taking time out of your morning to join us today and address that emergency. So thank you so much. I have to apologize. I have been working 11-hour days for the past 3 or 4 weeks, maybe more, because we go into action next week, because budget week sits next week. And so I'm expecting to be back into prison next week. And I want to share with you why. Normally when I start this conversation, I would start by addressing the climate science, just to really ground us in where we're at. But I'm going to do that with a bit of just participatory check-in. So just raise your hand if you understand or know what a tipping point is. Yeah, cool. Educated audience. Great. And I guess when we talk about tipping points, it's sort of like that point of no return. The best science that we have at the moment is that point of no return into a collapse of uninhabitability is sort of around 2035. I was talking to Will Steffen last week, who's a leading climate scientist at ANU. He's an expert witness in several court cases, including the duty of care court case. Who's familiar with the duty of care court case with the Environment Minister? Yeah, cool, great. So I'll go over that a little bit. So he says that we have to zero out on emissions by 2035 globally, and that Australia should be zeroing out on emissions by 2030. and that is to avoid what he calls global civilization collapse, which he describes as a precipitous drop in human population, also known as hell on earth. So when we talk about avoiding hell on earth, if we say that, you know, the final tipping point of avoiding that scenario is at 2035, we can sort of imagine this situation where we've got to catch a bus to the hospital. And if we've got to catch this bus to the hospital to save our life is at stake. Do we turn up at 3 p.m. when the bus is due? Well, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd probably say I would turn up maybe at 10 a.m. in the morning if my life depended on it. But let's say, for example, if the bus is due at 3, maybe you'd turn up at 2:30, maybe you'd turn up at 2 o'clock. And so I think that the concept is that we really have run out of time to delay any further because we're already so close to that point. Where we just need an emergency speed transition right now. And so that's what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for an emergency speed transition. Technically, Extinction Rebellion's 3 demands. The second demand is to zero out emissions and halt biodiversity loss by 2025. Who knows about biodiversity loss? Is that a strange term to you? Yeah, okay, cool. So, yeah, I had another scientist tell me that losing biodiversity is like taking bricks out of your house and expecting it still to stand. So, and unfortunately, most of the biodiversity loss that we have at the moment is still human. Well, I mean, fortunately, it's still human caused. So if we just sort of decide to stop destroying our oceans and our forests, then we can significantly decrease the amount that we're losing, and that not as much is done from the biodiversity collapse of the climate warming up. So that's why those two things are actually separated. So, all right, so we've covered tipping points, we've covered when, and I guess a really important part of this is to talk about civil disobedience. And I think that that's probably going to be the most contentious thing to any community, because it is very serious to engage in civil disobedience. It is the final line, right? I've never been in trouble with the law before, but I am utterly convinced that now is the time to engage in civil disobedience. And if you don't want to take my word for it, you can take the word of Cristina Figueres, who is the Secretary General of the UNFCCC. And she said that it's time to participate in nonviolent civil disobedience movements wherever possible. So she's calling us, the UN is calling us to do civil disobedience. And she says that it's not only a moral choice, but it is the most powerful way of shaping world politics. So, who here's heard of the civil rights movement? You got civil rights movement? Yeah. Yeah, cool. And what about part of the civil rights movement is like the freedom rides? Anyone heard of the freedom rides? Yeah. Yeah, great. There's an awesome documentary on it online if you haven't heard of it, for those watching at home as well. And so with the freedom rides, all these people jumped on 2 buses and they went down to the south, and they knew that they were going to get repressed, and they knew that that it could. They signed their will. They signed their wills before they left. They knew that they were risking death. Now, we have a lot of privilege in this country that we can do a lot of civil disobedience. We can make a lot of impact without actually risking our lives. So I think that that would give us a lot of privilege at this point, and a lot of more responsibility to act than ever before. So, yeah, you've got great quotes like things from David Attenborough saying we cannot be radical enough. There's some key points of civil disobedience. So basically, Erica Chenoweth is this researcher, and she had a bet with her friend, and she bet that violent movements were more successful than non-violent movements. And so Maria and Erica went away and they researched 300 social change movements. And what they found was that you're twice as likely to succeed with non-violence than violence, and that any movement that had managed to mobilize 3.5% of the population at one active time had never failed. So you don't need everybody. You only need 3.5% of the population, which is still quite significant. So for the school strike, we had 300,000 people on the streets in one day, which is like 1% of our population. But it was only one day, and it's still obviously basically the government's response was that's the fast track line to the Centrelink queue, I think was the response to that. They didn't listen, right? So the other thing that Common Sense for the 21st Century is another article written by Roger Hallam, who's one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion. And he found that the more radical or sacrificial when you're, because we take responsibility for actions, so we don't do civil disobedience and then run away. If we sit on the road, we take responsibility and we say, yeah, I did it, and I did it because I have to do it. And so the more radical you're willing to be, the more likely, the less people you need, is the thing. So if you're willing, if you've got 300,000 people on the streets, maybe in terms of like equivalent power, you might have, 100, maybe 1,000 people just arrested, right? And then equivalent to that amount of power is, say, like 100 people going to prison. Now, obviously, we're in a time of COVID. That's not direct numbers, but it has that thing. So we're in a time of COVID. It's very difficult, as you can imagine, to safely mobilize an extreme, like a huge protest because obviously of lockdowns and all of that. So as much as I obviously don't want to go to prison, it's not a great place. I mean, I feel relatively safe in our prisons. I know a lot of people don't, but I have a lot of privilege. But it is the most effective way at this point to make the political change that we need, with the amount of people that we can mobilize at this time of a health crisis. And what we're seeing, interestingly, is agreeing with us. So Wednesday, one of my fellow rebels, partner, he had court for blocking a major road in Melbourne by getting up on top of a truck. And the banner said, it was the Greta quote, "Your house is on fire. I want you to act as if your house is on fire because it is." And the other one was something about action, like if not you, then who? And basically, the judge wanted to give him a good behavior bond, and he said, well, I'm not going to sign a good behavior bond because I'm probably going to be compelled to continue going on my current trajectory. And the judge said, I respect that. And then dropped his fine from 5,000 to 0. So we're at a time, yeah, thanks. I was such a win. I was dancing around the house. So we're at a time where like a lot of people really recognize the necessity. During our autumn rebellion in Melbourne, we were blockading the streets day after day for a week, and Adam Bant, who's the Greens leader there, he said, he called us heroes on the public record. He went into Parliament And he said, these people are heroes, for the record. When we had an Age article put out, the commuters furious as Extinction Rebellion blockades roads again was the heading, and at the bottom they had a poll, do you support Extinction Rebellion? And 86% of people said they supported our causes, even though it was such a negative article. Yeah. When I started training to do this, they told me it would be like being the suffragettes. They told me that we would, the people would say, oh, we don't like what they're doing, but women should get the vote. We don't like what XR are doing, but we need action on climate. And I was very prepared for that, and it doesn't surprise me when we still get that occasionally. But what I mostly see is that people are terrified, and they're really grateful that people are taking the appropriate response to this absolute emergency, this terrifying hell on earth trajectory that we can absolutely change if we manage to be strong enough and do it together. Yeah. So next week, I'm going to be blockading roads and blockading the Environment Minister's office to ask her to drop her duty of care appeal. So for those who don't know, there was a federal court ruling that she has a duty of care to the youth when it comes to climate emissions. And she's appealing that decision, and she's appealing that decision while she's overseas, and was doing that while she was overseas, lobbying for the Great Barrier Reef to not be put on the endangered list. And yeah, obviously she just has no interest in protecting us or our children's future. And so we're gonna take that to her, and we've got a lot of support through a lot of networks to do that. And we've got, yeah, quite a few people willing to sacrifice a lot to make that message really strong.
What are you going to do, Violet?
Well,
can't you tell us?
Say. You have to come and find out, or watch the live streams. It'll be on Extinction Rebellion Australia. But there's some public facing events, so if you're in the area, you can come to the public.
She's my MP. What day? Will you tell me what days, and I'll turn up if I can.
Tuesday and Wednesday. No, in Canberra.
Oh, in Canberra. Oh.
Yeah.
Our local MP in Mulberry. I'm always at her office and writing letters and banging on a door.
Good. Yeah, you should go and glue on inside her office.
Get to Canberra.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Just muted myself. They've got a very strong group, Lizette and company, and Stopadani and all that stuff in Albury. They're very, very strong. So part of that little lot. Sorry to interrupt. But I thought I was going to get a chance to barricade the door or stop her getting in or out or something.
Yeah, do that. Climb on a roof. Dump a bunch of horse shit on a door. Something like that. Maybe something. Anyway. All right, look, that's a lot of talking from me, and I'm talking very slow, and because I've been working so hard, and I'm so sorry that you're getting this end of it, but the show must go on. Does anyone want to? Yeah, do you want to make some comments? Do you want
What's a full-time activist do, Violet?
What does a full-time activist do? Okay. No, that's a good question.
What do you do all day?
Yeah, so mostly it's a lot of Zoom meetings. Connecting with people, talking to people. It's a lot of writing media releases, making contacts in the media. There's banner painting, obviously, and creating costumes and what else? Timelines, spreadsheets, lots of visioning, like legal, like going through legals because you have people informed consent. So compiling legal documents and yeah, a lot. But it can feel like, yeah, it's just, does that help?
Well, it helps, yeah.
Well, I'm one of the ones that's not going to be vaccinated. I think it's my right to decide what goes into my body, not some government bod. Now, I'd like to know two things. How many people here have been vaccinated and how many believe in compulsory vaccination?
I'm just gonna, like, it's not really about the climate. Let's not get too sidetracked in here. But I think that we definitely believe in the science and follow health advice. I do anyway. I think that's a good thing to do.
I say that comes down to what you're supporting is sort of anarchy for some, but not for others. I'm not going to be vaccinated, and I see where in South Australia there's $50,000 fines being threatened at a couple who won't be vaccinated. What sort of a country are we going to?
Sorry, Lou, I'm going to interject. I listened to Caroline talking about London and 53,000 to 60,000 people a day, and I hear all about vaccination, and we were vaccinated as kids for diphtheria, for scarlet fever, for polio and all that stuff. We haven't been through that again, never going to go through that again. Get vaccinated or just isolate yourself, full stop. Really, really strong pro-vaccine. Sorry, Lou.
Let's get back to XR and talk to Greg. Greg, got a question.
Yeah, I got 4 questions.
But 4 questions.
Just quick answers though. How many years in jail will you be facing this time when you go, because you've got form violent?
I think this time it's closer to 2 weeks. If I have a choice of it, but some of the things that you never know once you hand over your freedom.
And why are you going to jail? Just for blocking intersections? Is that worthy of going to jail?
Yeah, so the way we go about it is it's called a non-compliance escalation. So basically, you refuse to comply with the system at all once you're arrested. And if you refuse to comply with the system, including signing bail conditions, then they have to put you into remand center, which is a prison. And yeah, so we just call an egg and say prison, but technically you're in remand for not signing bail. Most people in prisons are in remand from not signing bail, and most of those people are First Nations people as well. And in October, we plan to have hundreds of people going to prison, and basically we'll be able to flood the prisons, which means that people who are in there for charges that are really low criminal offences and are close to their sentences will get pushed out, which mostly means that we're going to be pushing out First Nations people who are there under incorrect charges, which is great.
Will you be going to jail in Canberra or Victoria?
Yep, Alexander McConaughey Centre. If you want to come visit, let me know. I'll put you on my list.
Okay. And what type of people join Extinction Rebellion? Do they tend to be students, and do they tend to be young?
No, I've inherited so many grandparents from doing XR. It's wonderful. This house that I'm staying in is Margaret's house, who's hosting us now at the moment. She's 80 years old. And it's funny. I don't know why XR attracts more retired people than the youth, and we're really trying to get the youth on board. But I think people of my age generation, they're either having kids, which I'm too terrified to do, or they're focusing on their career, so like 30s to 40s. But we're attracting more and more of the youth in terms of like 15 to 20.
Men and half women in your group, roughly?
Mostly
or
women.
Mostly
Mostly
women.
women.
Ah, right.
Mostly women. Yeah.
You're
About
attracting
80%
this
women.
particular grandfather because he's worried about his grandchildren's future.
Hmm.
Very
Yes.
true.
My question's about the media. I've never received a media release, even though I sort of belong to Extinction Rebellion in the inner city, Sydney, and with the Red, the Red Rebels. And I've been to a lot of their empathy cafes over last year and this year. So I'm sort of right into it, and I appreciate what you're doing. But I think on the analogy of this COVID outreach, which we're having in Western Sydney, suddenly people are saying, we haven't reached out to the multicultural Sydney. Well, half of Australia is multicultural. Look at all of us. We're all white, privileged people, as you said, when you came out of prison. I really appreciate that you understand the privilege we've got. We can get absolutely tons of information coming through our ears without even trying. But if you're speaking other languages, you're really locked into another whole very smaller culture. And a lot of people, they said, are not complying. We had riots in Sydney last Saturday, and the army are now out in force today because they're frightened of, people running around without masks and throwing things and everything. But these seem to be just disorganized people, really. I don't even want to discuss that, but I wonder if they are disaffected from the mainstream society and disconnected from the information that they need to get. And this climate information has just gone right off the media, like tiny bits of climate. Meanwhile, the nature is putting on the greatest show at the moment with, incredible heat wave destruction of marine life in Vancouver. I reported on that just recently, just washing up, billions of sea life just washing up on the beaches of Vancouver. Vancouver's a very temperate place. Plus dams busting in China. Like, nature is actually really showing, and we're only at 1 degree of warming now. So what you're saying, I know, and Robert knows, we're reporting on this all the time, but I feel that the mainstream media is just obsessed with COVID. Of course, they have to be. That's sort of, they're giving a message, but the number one, the mainstream media has let climate go off the agenda, but also a lot of people are just not being even reached by that mainstream media.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that
certainly about climate.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, a lot of people of color in Australia know how bad it is. Like, a lot of them have come from India and Bangladesh, which is, Bangladesh has a wall with India.
I know.
Yeah. So, but I think that the thing that really, starving people can't go on hunger strike. So if you are already disadvantaged by our system, so it's harder to get a job when you're a person of color. You're already targeted by the police when you're a person of color. And so I think that there is a lot more barriers to being able to do this extracurricular activity of protecting our planet. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, and I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that hungry people can't go on hunger strike. And I think that that's got a lot to do with it. But it's a really good point you raised, Vivian. But we have to weaponize our privilege.
But the media,
Sorry?
you said you're doing a lot of media outreach. Are you getting through?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't get our media releases because we send them directly to the media. We got a lot of media when were you there? Did you see me glue on inside the IPC in Sydney?
Yes.
We were painted, so you would have seen that. But we don't send the media release.
But I do media. I'm with a community radio, and I've been doing it for 10 years. Community radio in Sydney and
Send me your email address. I'll get you our media releases.
Yeah.
And Danny, Sam. Sam, she's our spokesperson.
Yeah, what about the multicultural community? I'm just really starting to be very aware how privileged we are to have English-speaking skill, because if you're not, you're cut off from mainstream messages. And I think climate news is as much a mainstream message as COVID news.
Should be. It should be front page news every day. We should be monitoring the emissions and biodiversity like we monitor COVID. You know, like today we planted 1,000 more trees and we managed to restore this ecosystem and we got the parts per million down to 420 rather than whatever it is now.
Violet,
Yeah,
Violet,
absolutely.
how do you respond to accusations from people that you XR people are urban terrorists?
Well, I mean, terrorism, by definition, has to be putting people in danger. Whereas what we do is very open-hearted and very vulnerable. We don't, you know, we take responsibility for our actions and we do it with as much love as possible. Um, I think that people don't like to be disrupted. Because being disrupted means that they have to face the challenge that we put in front of them, which is that we are in an emergency situation, and they don't want to hear that the climate is breaking down because they've already got so much going on, and it means that they might have to give up their car, and so it's challenging. But what we are is the fire alarm. We are when your house is on fire, and then the awful beeping noise starts going off. That's what we are, and it is annoying, but it also indicates to you that you need to evacuate or take
I should add
emergency
that Mike was said before we came on air. Mike was talking about the fact that he was entangled with an XR rebellion protest in London, and how good it was. Can you tell us about that, Mike?
Well, it was October 2019, and we just wandered across the Thames and landed at Westminster, and we'd landed in the middle of this huge, many thousands of people, all XR. English people wearing funny horses' heads and carrying Viking helmets and Viking spears, but the attitude that was just one of happiness. Even the police who were surrounding them were all cheerful and happy. The whole thing was very orderly. They marched up the middle of a main thoroughfare. I forget which one it was, but they were heading towards Trafalgar Square. And they just took the whole road over. I think there might have been a few people around who were pissed off with the traffic, but, you know, the cars couldn't get in. But the actual feeling of the day was extraordinarily happy. And it struck me at the time that these people are supposed to be urban terrorists, but it didn't feel in any way threatening at all. We actually quite enjoyed the experience, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just think Caroline was part of that, Michael. My daughter, who lives in London with all the problems, was very much part of that with her partner. And I'm supporting Bush Heritage as we try to save the Tarkine and those 2,000-year-old trees and 500-year-old myrtles from just being chopped up and sent to Japan for wood chip. No, that doesn't bear thinking about. But it was a 69-year-old businessman that was arrested, the one of the last ones, and we've got a stay of execution from dear Susan Lee, but it's far from over. But how we can allow that to even begin to happen, the tailings dam, the chopping down, the logging, it beggars belief. I'm sorry. I've just another thing, I found a slide I got that talked about taking action, regardless, criminal action or whatever you like to call it, or terrorist action. And it talks about slavery was legal, freeing slaves was criminalized, segregation was legal, protesting racism was criminalized, corporate ecocide is legal, rebelling against it is criminalized. That sews it up for me. Sorry, Lou, I've got to get out there. You've got to do something.
We're all very negative at the moment, or pessimistic, but actually if you think back 5 years, a lot of things have happened in the last 5 years. You even hear BHP and Shell and all those companies saying positive things, what they're going to do. They're looking into the solar energy markets and investing in it, and getting money for coal mines is getting difficult. So there's actually a lot of things happening on the positive side that we kind of tend to forget, I think. So is that by taking action on the banks and on the big companies and contacting them, is that not a way of getting change as well?
Yeah, so the first company to release your individual carbon tracker was ExxonMobil, so that they could get you to focus on your individual action rather than them. And they do a lot of greenwashing. They were one of the first to know that the sea water levels would rise, and what they did was raise their oil rigs that are in the ocean up a few meters. They paid to raise them all up, but didn't talk to us about it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of greenwashing, but the fact is that emissions continue to rise every single day, and we continue to lose our ecosystems. Every year we have less and less. Australia is leading the way in mammal extinction. We're mammals, by the way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of evidence to say that they're not actually doing anything, even though they like to put out releases telling you they're doing stuff just so you calm the fuck down. Sorry for my language, but it's really, I would get really aggravated at that. Yes, we're doing an Don't Nab Our Future campaign at the moment. I was part of Galilee Blockade when I was dealing with those single issues, as Robert sort of mentioned in my intro. And the problem with single issue campaigns is that, first of all, it's very hard to get media. So this kind of harkens back to what Vivian was saying, which is like, we need to make climate the news. And since they're not doing it themselves, that's what we do. We make it the news. And it's very difficult to make it the news when you're taking it to private enterprise, because they don't want you to make it the news. So they don't they either block it, or like they leave you there or whatever. The news doesn't come. They don't care that you're there. Whereas when you're blocking the public, the news cares, like they come, and then you've got your banner saying climate and ecological emergency on the news. So at least we're sort of, that's the point, to get that messaging out. So yeah, it's just a lot less effective targeting businesses than it is to target either general public to be the alarm bell, or the politicians, because they're obviously the ones that we need to ultimately reach to change their mind on what's going on. So a big part of the strategy, and that's why I'm in Canberra at the moment, is to mobilize for making sure that when they do sit, when they're all here together, but you can absolutely do it like Val is doing, going into your local MP's office. But yeah, making sure that when they do sit, that they know that we're here and making a nuisance of ourselves, so that it's sort of like transferring basically the trouble that's coming from civilization collapse and hell on earth, trying to just bring that a little earlier to the people involved, so that not but so that they act on it. Yeah.
Superannuation funds is another way of, you can choose sustainable investment package, or whatever it's called. So all these things help, and they're relatively easy
but it's
to
not
do.
happening fast enough.
No, I know, that's but
that's the problem.
There's a famous saying from Groucho Marx. He said, I don't care much about future generations. They have never done much for me.
Yeah, well, Barnaby Joyce said a similar thing. The only thing certain about 2050 is most of us will be dead, so why should we care?
Yeah.
That's our Deputy Prime Minister, everybody.
But has he got grandkids, or what?
Yeah, well, that's a good question.
Derek's got a question. Derek.
Yeah, look, I've been following climate science for probably 20 years or more. I'm a scientist, and I agree. I think we are in deep shit from a humanity point of view. I think we are in deep shit. There's no doubt about that. I can tell you, You're very passionate in what you do, and I think you're doing a fantastic job. My problem is, okay, it's just how we all behave and act. Are we sort of, I think there's a danger that we brand the climate communication as a sort of, and I use the word regardlessly, as sort of a fringe. I would say a lunatic. You're not a lunatic. You know, none of us are lunatics, but there's a danger that we can sort of start to brand the climate movement in a way that sort of distraction doesn't become the central argument, it becomes a fringe argument, which is what we don't want, you know. So that's my concern in terms of the action we take and how we communicate. But I've got 100% in terms of you know, your passion and where we're going for that. And I haven't got any good answer, but I'm trying to do everything I can locally and think globally, and I think we're in deep shit, but I just don't know how we can move on.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point of view, Derek. I guess what I think is a bigger fear, which is what's been happening over the last 30 years, is that we're not telling people how serious it is. So there's been a big argument about what to even call it was climate change, global warming. I call it a climate and ecological emergency. Because I think that what's more important is that we're really clear about the risk. And when you're looking at the risk and when you're trying to communicate the risk, it's people like you who are really important to actually come on and sit on the road with us, because you have you're a scientist, and so you give gravitas to the movement. And that's why, you know, a lot of the people who are sitting on the road are nurses, they're teachers, they're doctors, they're, you know, actually most of these people are you know, quite professional people. And so that just trying to get those stories across that we aren't radicals, we're actually just really scared, normal, educated people. Also, it's worth mentioning that it's about the Overton window. So basically, there's a appropriate response in the general population of what's okay to sort of think about a thing, like the average popular response. It's the Overton window. And so, for example, in the 90s, it was perfectly acceptable to be homophobic on television. And so that was just the Overton window that's the normal response. However, now, obviously, if somebody did that, that Overton window is shifted into that being an inappropriate response. And the appropriate response is to obviously be respectful to our LGBTQI brothers and sisters. And so the similar thing with the climate, you know, the more you're willing to call it like it is and raise the alarm and tell the threat, that actually continues to shift that window into what is the appropriate response. And a lot of that has got to do with your body as well. You know, it's not just words, it's what you're actually willing to do with your body. And that's why a lot of what I do is physicalizing that threat into the world, and not just talking about it or writing about it. I go and take it to the streets, because I think that's the most powerful way that we can communicate how much of an emergency we are in. Yeah, I think it's really important that we do separate ourselves from the anti-vax, anti-lockdown community, because I'm really concerned about that community obviously risking the health and safety of our vulnerable people or anyone.
I'm really glad to hear that. I think but that's the danger. You start to get branded and lumped anti-vaxxers.
Yeah.
You know,
and so that's just all about clever messaging. So we're all wearing masks at our actions, even though that's beyond the health advice.
Yes.
We're wearing masks so that we can really keep ourselves separate from that. And it's really annoying, because I've started this slogan, activism is an essential service. but I don't want to empower too much. So now it's environmental activism is an essential service, because we are essential. This is life or death. Rather than risking billions of lives, who are people who are irresponsible with the health advice, we're trying to save them. So that's where I'm at.
Look, I thank you for your response. I don't want to bang on any further. I'll let others. We had a very good presentation from George, and I can't. Rob will know his name. And he talked about communication in climate science and where we've got it wrong. You know,
George Marshall.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
George Marshall.
It's George Marshall. Yeah. It's really worth looking at, because we're clearly not getting through, even with the work that you're doing, Violet. You know, we're not getting through. We're not getting through to the media. We're not getting through to the general population. We're years ahead. We're years behind in Australia. I think Europe and UK and others have moved a lot further.
We're the worst. We're the worst.
Yes.
But
Dead last.
yeah, we're last, absolutely. You know, and it's just, and the people, even the thinking people that I know, you know, that you'd think would be on board with this, we just haven't got through, you know, and it really worries me, because I think, as I say, I think we're in deep shit. Have a look at George Marshall, because I think he had what he was presenting sort of, it struck a chord with me. Well, this is why we're not getting through. Because we're clearly not getting through. Yeah.
Thank you. I just had to find the unmute button. Hello, everyone. Thanks for turning up and doing this, Violet. I have a question for you. There's a few organisations, but one of them is Market Forces. And they have been quite active in putting various resolutions to big companies' boards about their action to mitigate climate change. So I wanted to know from you, and I've been, if you look at my share portfolio, you'll actually see I've got some Whitehaven coal, which before you say shock horror, there's a reason for that. So I've signed on to a few of these resolutions using my shareholding out of my super fund. Are these actions having any effect?
Look, we are all raindrops in a storm trying to protect our planet. And I think that, you know, any action from trying to consume less to actively participating in those companies by having shares to, you know, signing petitions, they're all ways to contribute, and none of them are invalid. But we are reaching the end game, where if we are not successful, we will not have the opportunity to try again. And so I'll just, you know, reiterate what Christina Figueres says. Civil disobedience is the most powerful way of shaping world politics.
I don't have a question, but I guess just a couple of thoughts I've had through this. First, and so importantly, I will still be here in 2050. My kids will still be here in 2050. I deeply care about the fact that our future is in a very bad position. But I think one thing that really resonated was the idea of privilege. And while I understand that there are parts of the community that probably aren't maybe being reached or is involved, I know for myself, I'm in a point in my life where I couldn't be participating in this particular movement, because at the end of the day, if I was to get arrested, there'd be no one here to look after my kids. And so the fact that there are people who have that capacity and that level of privilege, I'm so glad that they're carrying that torch until I'm ready to be a part of that as well. And I think it comes down to that it's not that they're taking the space of that, it's that they can do it. And so I'm so glad that they are doing it. And it's been so brilliant listening to all of this and understanding it. And then listening to the commentary around the idea that it's not, the messages aren't getting through. I mean, I think that's unfortunately a really terrible side effect of the globalized world that we live in, it's in the media's best interest to make us sound like lunatics rather than actually focusing on the power. It's like women in politics, focus on what they're wearing, not what they're saying. And it's that same sort of distraction technique. And also the idea that we don't live our lives, you know, our social medias don't reflect the entire world around us and all the different views. It's just sort of our own bubbles that we create, and it creates this divide. So it's been really interesting listening to all of the different questions and thought processes we're going through, because I think for the people here and the people that will watch this video, they care so deeply about seeing action happen. And, you know, seeing Violet on the front lines doing that work is so fantastic to know, and that we can sit here and then that's happening and there's all these layers of people that care and that are taking action. It's just, that's probably my biggest takeaway from today. It's been brilliant.
I'm so sorry, Sam. I heard most of that, but I don't know why the internet's so bad in Canberra. So I'm on my phone
Called the
now.
Liberal Party.
Oh.
Thank you so much for everything you said, and I really care about you and your kids as well in 2050. But I just want to also say that there are plenty of roles that are not arrestable that you can do, and having children at the actions is actually really amazing. It keeps us all safe. So yeah, coming along, holding a banner, holding a placard, doing support from home, even by helping us push our social media and things like that, coming to the art days and painting a banner. That's also a really powerful way to help out. So there's lots of things you can do. All right. Was it Vivian who was talking?
Yes, I agree. Bring the children to the banner making. That'll help. But I want to know about targeting. You know, you said Australia's the worst, and I think so too, not just in our domestic emissions, but in our exported emissions in the coal and now increasingly gas. You know, we're the world leaders in that. And we have all these Stop Adani, and I think Val mentioned a big thing in Albury. I wonder how best are we trying to target them, you know, in Canberra or, you know, in disrupting the streets?
Yeah, so basically what we're going for is systemic change. There's too many front lines to try and target each individual front line. It just divides us too much, and then there's only 10 people focusing on one forest. Whereas if we manage to come together, and Canberra is the right place to do that, because that is our obviously like the symbolic center of power in our country. And so coming together into Canberra and making systemic change so it's actually illegal to continue means that every company, every deforestation place, every, you know, fishing outlet, all of that stuff will have to comply with that. And so that's why we target the public or politicians ideally. And I'm not saying don't take it to corrupt businesses as well. That's a fine place to do action. But the most important thing is that if you can't make next week in Canberra, what you do need to make is what we call Reclaim Our Future, which is an umbrella movement that is kicking off on the 16th of October, when the weekend before Parliament next sits. It's an occupation of Capitol Hill, and we're going to be camping on the streets. And it's just going to be the place where we make our stand and demand a habitable future for our children. And it will be kids safe, it'll be friendly, there'll be lots of care there. But I really tell your friends, please come, 16th of October, Capitol Hill.
We've reached midday, folks. So we better say thanks to Violet. That was wonderful. We appreciate you coming along. So yeah, let's all give her a clap by waving your hands around.
Thank you, Violet.
So thanks, Violet.
Very quickly, I've just clicked onto the two Facebook pages, the XR Australia Facebook page and the Reclaim Your Future Facebook page. Both of them are there with the dates that Violet has just mentioned, if anybody is interested in having a look at them.
Okay.
Thank you again, Violet.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
I do have to dash, so I'm going to jump straight off. Is that all right?
That's fine, Violet. Thank you very much,
Thank
Violet.
you very, very much.
Bless your
Appreciate
hearts.
that.
You're all very intelligent people. Really lovely to chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Violet.
We will never give in, Violet.